Welcome to my program, 10, 20, 30 minutes to quilt fleece. High-loft fleeces such as polar fleece and Eskimo fleece are favorite fabrics for a vest or jacket since they are easy sew, provide warmth without weight, and are almost reversible. With these characteristics, high-loft fleeces are almost perfect candidates for quilts. Start your adventure of using high-loft fleeces as quilting fabrics by creating a checkerboard quilt. This easy yet dramatic looking bed cover can be quickly sewn or serged, with serging being the fastest option. Discover the joy of quilting fleeces next on Sewing with Nancy.
Sewing with Nancy, TV's how-to sewing program with Nancy Zeman, is being brought to you by PFAFF, the largest European producer of sewing machines. PFAFF's creative line of sewing machines and hobby-lock sergers are simply the best. Ginger, a tradition of quality in scissors and shears for home, classroom, and industry. Ginger scissors and shears are the choice of professionals. Madeira thread from Germany with superior quality and smart packaging to make it a sensational value, preferred by home and professional embroiderers everywhere. Oxmoor House, the publisher of innovative sewing, quilting, and craft books, including books by Nancy Zeman. Prim Dritz, the source for sewing and quilting notions, including products by Dritz, Collins, and Omnigrid. Amazing Designs by Great Notions, your complete source for machine embroidery. Over 200 embroidery pack collections currently available, including designs by Nancy Zeman. And Nancy's Notions catalog, featuring specialty sewing books and unique, hard-to-find sewing notions and supplies.
To make this checkerboard quilt, you will need 2.5 yards of two fabrics. Obviously, we've chosen red and black. When working with this fabric, you're only going to have one layer, not a batting and a backing, just the layer of fleece. The fleece has a right and wrong side. Give the crosswise cut a tug, and it will always roll to the wrong side. The wrong and right side almost are reversible. That's why we can get away with just single layer of fabric for this quilt. We're going to be cutting super-sized strips, not 2.5 or 1 inch strips, but 5 and 14-inch strips. Working with 2.5 yards of fleece, I like to have the majority of the fabric to my right, I'm right-handed, and then place the fabric on the cutting mat, and I'm going to cut 5-inch strips. But my first strip, I'm going to cut a generous 5-inch width, not exactly 5-inch, because I want to square that edge as the second step. For the rotary cutter, I'm going to place it almost perpendicular to the mat so that I'm taking as much advantage of the blade as I can. I'm going through 4 layers of fleece. I have the fleece folded in half and then half again. To get this an exact 5-inch strip and to cut this other edge, I'm going to flip it over, align the cut edge with the ruler at 5 inches, and then trim off the excess fabric. And again, get that ruler, or that, I should say, that cutter perpendicular to the ruler, and just keep on cutting. It is a little difficult to cut at an angle, but you can see that with this depth of fabric you need to straighten the edge in this manner. You're going to be cutting 4 5-inch strips of fabric. This is 60 inches long, and then 4 14-inch wide strips. And I'm not going to cut this, but just show you the process. This edge has been cut neatly. I'll align it with the edge of my board and then find the 14-inch mark. Then I would place the ruler, aligning it with the mark on the ruler as well as on the mat, getting the two lined, and then cut again. So you're having lots of pieces of fabric that you'll be cutting. Some of these 14-inch lengths are going to be subcut. We're going to have quite a few 14-inch squares. You'll see that all the 14-inch squares are alternating the checkerboard. And in the border section, the red fabric is cut into 41.5-inch lengths as border sections. There is a square, a long length, and then another square. This way you can utilize the beauty of the fabric, the extra width of the fabric. We're going to sew these together to create the checkerboard. And we're going to create stratas, which term we use for quilting, but this time we're going to be working with the fleece fabric. You have the red sandwiching the black, and then the reverse strata that you'll create will be to take a red and surround it with black fabric. So we're going to have these 2 stratas that we're going to sew together, or I should say serge together, and I'm going to show you that now. There are two ways to construct a fleece quilt, one by the serger and the other by the sewing machine. Both techniques are very simple, the serger being the fastest. I have my machine set up for a 4-thread overlock, a traditional overlock stitch. Notice I have 4 spools of thread. I'm going to use a balance stitch with about a 1/4 of an inch wide seam. You may have to test, or I highly recommend you test a seam just to check the stitch length and the stitch width. You're going to have 5 by 60-inch strips that you're going to serge together. Remember that the fabric rolls to the wrong side, so I have my fabrics pinned together. They're rolling to the wrong side, so I have the right sides pinned together. My 1/4 of an inch seam allowance has been set, and now all I'm going to do is align the fabric with the blade area of the serger and serge, making certain that I'm aligning these cut edges as I'm serging and trimming off any little extra fabric that may be there. I've shortened my stitch or my strip lengths. They're not 60 inches, but you'd be serging quite a long length. And then simply cut off your serge seam, and you can see that this edge has been compressed because it's been serged and very neatly finished. Rather than pressing, I like to finger press the fabric to prevent flattening of the nap. Just finger press the seam. If you need to have a little assistance, you could steam the fabric without touching the iron to the surface and then finger press again. Never iron this fabric or press it traditionally. Now I would need to add another strip to this fabric, making the red on both sides, the black in the center. That would be one type of strata. You're going to serge together 2 stratas of this combination. And the complement of this with the black on either end and the red in the middle, just 1 strata of that. If you didn't have a serger or you want to use your traditional machine, that works out just as well. 1/4 of an inch seam allowances are what we're recommending. And here you can see a 1/4 of an inch seam using a traditional quilting foot or the 1/4 of an inch width on your presser foot, and then follow that by a zigzag stitch. And we've overlocked the edges with a zigzag stitch, not a serger stitch, but just a zigzag to encase those edges. Again, finger press the seam. Now after you've created your stratas, you're going to cut them apart. Cut them apart into 5-inch strips. We're going to use the common widths. And here you can see the 2 common widths that I've been working with, or the 2 common groupings, the red on each side and the black on each side and the red. You're going to cross-cut into 5-inch strips. Here you can see how I'm aligning the ruler along the seam and then creating the 5-inch width and simply cutting the strips. Cut all 3 groupings into 5-inch strips. You're going to have a lot of stacks of fabric. Then meet a strata or a strip from one grouping with the other to start to create the checkerboard. And I've placed a few pins. You'll have to make certain that at the intersection that you have one seam allowance going in one direction and the opposite seam allowance finger pressed in the other to eliminate some of the bulk. And then we'll start to serge. Again, using the same technique, aligning the fabric next to the blade of the fabric and serging. And I'll remove the pin, making certain that those pins or the seam allowances are nested together, kind of positioned together. I'm going to stop again and double check that my seam allowances are meeting. And you can feel if they're meeting or not with your finger, and then just serge. I would need to add 1 more strip to this section to create a 9 patch. It would be a strip that will have red on either side of the black. And here you can see the 9 patch I've created with these supersized blocks, 5 inches wide. You'll be creating 8 of these, and now I'll show you how to assemble the quilt. This program is called 10, 20, 30 Minutes to Quilt Fleece, and we have found in working with this checkerboard quilt that has taken us about 30 minutes to cut out all the fleece, and then 30 minutes each to sew all the strata together and re-sew them into the various 9-patch blocks. And after you have taken time to work on those various sections, then it's time to create the rows. We have 2 different row arrangements. The first row that you can see on the top will be a checkerboard or a 9-patch followed by a 14-inch block and then another 9-patch. The alternate row, 2 black 14-inch squares and then a 9-patch in the middle. On the table I have started to arrange or lay out the rows. You're going to be sewing 3 rows with the 9 patches on each side. So you'll have 3 rows with a 9-patch, a black, and then another 9-patch block. The other row configuration is just the opposite, with a 14-inch square, a black, the 9-patch, and then the black. And you serge all the seams together to create the rows. You'll have 2 rows with the black on each side, 3 rows with the 9 patch on each side, and then sew all of these rows together, the 5 rows together. You'll be amazed how quickly this quilt can be created. Now the borders are a little bit different. We're working with supersized strips of fabric because we're working with the high-loft fleeces. And I'm going to kind of untuck my border that I'm hiding, and it's a combination of the 14-inch blocks of black fabric, and then the 14-inch wide strips of the red are cut into 2 different lengths. You'll be cutting 4 strips that are 28 inches long. And here I have a 14-inch block at the very corner, this long 28-inch strip, a 14-inch block, and then I repeat the red strip of 28 inches and another block. So you can see this is a big, big throw. The lower edge is slightly different. We're going to again work with those 14-inch strips for each corner, but the middle section is a longer block. And this block measures 41.5 inches. Keep in mind, all of these measurements are in the booklet that accompanies the program. With a lot of serging and a little time spent, you'll be able to put this together in about 3.5 to 4 hours perhaps. The hemming is the next step, the last step. We're working with simple sewing techniques. We'll simply fold under about 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch hemline and top stitch from the right side, top stitch along the edge. At the corners, just simply fold the corners like you would on a normal fabric and do the top stitching, and your quilt is complete. The fleece is washable, dryable, and very comfortable to cuddle up to and fun to sew or serge. You can almost hear the clip-clop of a horse-drawn carriage in the distance as you easily serge or sew this stunning throw that features a characteristic Amish design in a completely uncharacteristic fabric, high-loft fleece. Enjoy the process of creating as well as using this cozy quilt. We've chosen 3 colors of fleece for this quilt in navy, burgundy, as well as forest green. And you need about 1 yard of the navy and the burgundy and 1 1/8, a little extra, of the forest green color. We're going to be cutting a lot of 6-inch strips as well as squares of fabric. You can use the same cutting techniques that we detailed for the checkerboard, using the rotary cutter and a ruler. When working with the strips, since they are 6 inches wide, it's very convenient because the width of the ruler can be used as your guideline. But let me give you the exact dimensions for the various fabrics. So the navy, a 30-inch square is the mainstay, that center section. It's placed point on point. You also need 4 6-inch squares of fabric. So that's the yardage needed from the navy fabric. The green, the forest green fabric, you're going to be cutting in 6-inch strips. The lengths will be adjusted to fit the border size, and I'll give you those as we go along. Basically, you'll need 4 lengths that are 30 inches because they're going to flank each side of the middle section. And we would serge or sew 1 strip on each side. And then, before sewing the alternate ends, please serge or stitch a 6-inch square to the ends. This is a lot of fabric to work with, but you can see how quickly this starts to look like the Amish design, the very typical Amish design. Underneath, I have the burgundy cut into 28 3/4 inch squares and then recut into right triangles. This is a very odd amount, 28 3/4, but when you recut it down the center, you'll have the perfect size to fit around the basic point-on-point square in the center. We look at our quilt that's displayed here, you can see that 1, 2, and then down below I have 3 and 4 of these right triangles. Now when cutting this point on point, cutting this being the 28 3/4 inch squares, cutting them down the center, this edge is going to have more stretch than the other edges. And what I would like to recommend is to sew or serge with this layer on the lower edge, or meeting the feed dogs of your serger or sewing machine. To help get the right positioning, fold that long edge in half. Place a pin at the center point, just like we so often do for sewing, marking specific areas. And then I have the right side of this center section, and I'll kind of drape this off. If you have a large ping pong table to work with or a kitchen table, this would be the perfect time to do that type of, clear that area so you can lay out this large piece. And then you would be meeting these edges together and do a little bit of preliminary pinning. You'll find that the very point of the right triangles will extend out, and you'll sew or serge a 1/4 of an inch seam, attaching a right triangle on each side of this large quilt block. I think you can see how we're going to finish this area. The green strips that are 6 inches wide are cut the finished size of that middle section, and then you're going to be adding 6-inch squares on each corner. Now you'll notice that instead of using the turn under edge technique on the finishing section of this quilt, which is a possibility, we have added binding, stretch binding like they use on high loft fleeces for jackets or vests. And we use the same technique of sewing, this time with a 1/2 of an inch seam. We bought 8 yards of stretch binding, met it right sides together, stitched a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then wrapped it around to the underside. On this other little sample corner, we simply stitched in the ditch, stitched on the right side of the fabric to catch the underside, to give it a nice little finish. So if you've created a fleece vest or jacket, this is an appropriate time to add that same finish to your Amish-influenced throw. A fun project to put together. Blankets of high loft fleece keep babies cozy, warm, and secure. They're simple to sew and can easily be embellished with fleece appliques and fleece yarn. You can just hear the oohs and ahs you'll receive when presenting this blanket to a new mom. The blanket has many of the same characteristics as our earlier quilts and blankets as we did in this series, but we've added some additional embellishments, as you saw. The appliques, either using a few hearts and making a wreath out of them, or a larger heart as an applique. The fleece yarn is made right from the fleece, and I'll show you how to add this little squiggle effect to your fabric if you'd like. And you can see the borders that have been added in much of a very traditional quilt manner. The backing has flannel. We added another layer just to make it extra cozy for a baby. That's optional. As you saw earlier, these blankets or throws can be reversible. The yardage is simple. This is about a 45-inch square, give or take in 1/2 an inch or so. So you need about a yard and a 1/4 of the flannel. For the cream, the background fabric, you'll need 1 yard of fabric. The other 4 colors, about 3/8 of a yard. You'll have a little extra of some of the colors, but that's a good guesstimate of how much yardage you'll need. Now remember, this is the high loft fleece that we're working with. The 15-inch squares are what you're going to be cutting from the center fabric or the cream fabric. You'll be cutting borders that are 5 inches wide, 5 inches by 15 inches of the blue and the yellow. 6-inch squares, and we're going to cut those down a little bit later for the squiggle appliques. And then for the pink heart appliques, I've traced my heart design from the pattern that's given in the book onto a double sticky web on the paper side. After you trace all of your designs, you remove one of the papers. There are 2 papers sandwiching the web in this instance. You can save that as a stabilizer if you'd like. And then simply place the sticky side, it's sticky, to the wrong side of the fleece. Oh, let me get it repositioned. This works out well because you don't have to press it. You can just press it with your hand and then cut all the way around. Notice I have the inner details of the heart there too. We'll pay attention to that a little bit later. Then peel off the other side, save this paper, and center it on one of the squares. Find the center and press down. Now this is a temporary press. Now we need to stitch using a straight stitch to position the hearts, and I'll show you how to do that at the machine. To applique the design onto your fleece fabric, all you need is a straight stitch. I've used monofilament thread in the needle and then the corresponding needle, the Metafill needle, to go along with it. In the bobbin, use thread that matches your base fabric. You'll see on my machine that I have an open toe foot, and let me show you a close-up of one of these feet. It has an opening through the center, making it easier to guide your fabric, and we're going to use the inside of this foot as a guideline as well. My machine is set for a straight stitch, about a 2.0 stitch length or 12 to 15 stitches per inch. Notice that I'm going to stitch right along the edge, and the fabric will not ravel. The open toe foot allows me to guide the fabric right along that inside area. And that's all there's to it. You don't have to satin stitch, and if you stitch a little bit uneven, the stitch will be hidden right in the nap of the fabric. Now, to get the inside detail that you have on that heart, we had the little shapes, simply place the paper that you removed over the fabric and restitch following these lines. On the next sample that I'm going to show you, I've already restitched that. The stitch will perforate the paper, allowing you to peel off the paper backing, and you have that inside detail stitched right in there to get the nice curves and shapes. So that's how you can simply add appliques to fleece. We added some fleece yarn to some of the green squares. We cut 6-inch squares, and I'm going to add these little squiggles. Now, fleece yarn is something that you create yourself by cross-cutting a 1/4 of an inch to a 1/2 of an inch wide strips. This is a 1/2 of an inch, and when you pull it, you get yarn, like chenille yarn. It's fun to create. This was sent to me by a viewer a long time ago, and we've used this idea so many times. It's just a great idea. Do test out which width you'd like, a 1/4 or a 1/2 of an inch, and then give it a stretch. On your 6-inch square, mark a squiggle shape. And now I'm going to change my my stitch length to a zigzag stitch, and I'm simply going to zigzag, placing the yarn down on the fabric, following my stitch, and zigzag over the edge. That's it. Just keep following the area, and I'm going to pivot now and just keep going around. It'll take a little while to you to shape around this area. After you've done the shaping, you can trim off the excess length of your yarn and then trim down the size to 5 inches. You'll spend about 20 minutes of time attaching the appliques to the center squares, as well as about 20 minutes of sewing all the squiggles to the corners, the 6-inch squares. After stitching these squiggles, we did trim these down to 5-inch squares. We found that we needed to cut them larger and then trim, because sometimes the stitching caused the fabric to shrink a little bit. That was easier to keep the square square. Now for some assembly. It's simple. It's following some of the same techniques we worked with earlier in this program. You can see the center block is flanked on either side by a blue strip. Our strips are 5 inches wide. They're all 5 inches, and these are 15 inches long, the same length as our block. And so we simply added a blue strip to each side of the cream-colored background, or the cream-colored square. The rows have been created with the high loft fleeces, 5 inches by 15, and then of course you can see a squiggle little square, and then you simply add another square, another strip of yellow, and so forth. And you sew or serge these together using the same techniques we went over earlier. You can leave the quilt at this point. You would not have to back it, but we added that little extra flannel to the lower edge, around the whole quilt I should say, cutting it 45-inch square piece of flannel. Center the quilt. We have a very small sample to show you, but you would have a 44-inch to 43-inch quilt that you would center on this 45-inch piece of fabric. Start at one corner. Fold the corner of the flannel to meet the corner of the fleece crease. Fold it a second time, and you're going to do this double folding all along the edge. Fold the edge of the flannel to the edge of the fleece. Fold a second time. And then I'll show you on this side, fold the edge of the fabric to the fleece, and then fold again. And I've mitered this corner. All that is needed now is to straight stitch around the edge to attach the layers. To keep the flannel and the fleece together, we restitch through all layers, highlighting the heart shapes and some of the border shapes. With these simple straight stitching and serging techniques, you can have this great baby flannel throw. I hope you've enjoyed this program on 10, 20, 30 minutes to quilt fleece. The 3 projects that I have shown you are perfect opportunities to sew and serge even if your sewing time is limited. For example, if you have 30 minutes, you could cut out your quilt pieces. If you had 20 minutes, you could serge some sections together, or another 20 minutes, you could do some applique on this baby quilt. I hope you'll give one of these quilts a try. Thanks for joining me. Bye for now.
Visit Nancy's website at www.sewingwithnancy.com for more information on this program. Sewing with Nancy has been made possible by grants from the following companies: PFAFF, simply the best European line of sewing machines; Ginger, a tradition of quality in scissors and shears; Madeira Threads, designed for home and professional embroiderers everywhere; Oxmoor House, publishers of sewing, quilting, and craft books; Prim Dritz, the source for sewing and quilting notions; Amazing Designs by Great Notions, your complete source for machine embroidery; and Nancy's Notions Sewing Catalog, featuring specialty sewing books and notions.